Welcome to Trashmagination, a podcast about reimagining trash. I'm Carla Brown. Today's episode is about the creative reuse of bread and Brewers' spent grains, or the grains left over after making beer. Lots of people make art from bread. And some of my favorite examples are for example, the Japanese bread with really cute images hidden inside the loaves that you can only see when you slice the bread. Or I love the bread that looks like a cat that is sleeping, that's called the cat loaf. And then I love the bread that is like a focaccia bread, a big rectangle, and it gets decorated with vegetables or edible flowers, and it looks like a painting, and some people call it Van Gogh. Haha. And then I love the toasters that let you print images on bread. So all of those ideas are really fun, but they are not really creative reuse of bread that would otherwise go to landfill. So today, our goal is to talk about art that is made from unwanted bread or the grains left over from making beer, which are mostly put into landfill. So first, I want to applaud the many efforts to get bread to hungry people. So we have all donated to food banks, and they are a huge, wonderful group of organizations helping people every day. And then these days, there are new models for diverting food to the people who need it. For example, there are apps such as Rescuing Leftover Cuisine, Food for All, Olio, or Too Good to Go. Those are just four I know about, and if you're not familiar with them, I'll put the links in the show notes. And there are these really cool grocery stores that specialize in gathering food that is going to be thrown away. For example, there's a grocery store chain in Germany called Surplus. And then there's a model called the Inconvenience Store in New Zealand. And these are innovative models that I hope will get replicated in communities around the world. So now let's learn about people who are doing unusual things to creatively reuse bread. The first story is probably my favorite. It is about a company called Up Printing Food, and it's in the Netherlands. So this company takes unwanted bread or rice and then mashes it into a paste that they can then print into beautiful shapes using a 3D printer. The images are then cooked in the oven until they have a cookie-like texture. And this gives that product a longer shelf life than a normal loaf of bread. And they print beautiful and delicate shapes. Sometimes they use them to decorate desserts or appetizers, or they make fun snacks. And they can change the color of the items using vegetables such as beets, kale, or carrots. One of the founders, Elsland van Dolweerd, came up with the idea when she was studying industrial design in 2018, and she learned that bread was the most wasted food in the Netherlands. The next stories are about companies who transform excess bread into beer or vodka. So let's start with beer. Probably the best known company that does this is called Toast Ale, and they're in the United Kingdom. So Toast Ale makes beer from the heel ends of sandwich bread that they get from bread factories. The bread replaces 1/3 of the malted barley that they would normally use to make beer. So they are still using some new beer grains to make their beer. They get the bread for free from the bread factories because it helps those factories to avoid paying landfill costs. Plus, it helps those companies to reduce their environmental impact. And while almost any bread could be used to make beer, they avoid bread that has a lot of oil, such as focaccia, and they avoid bread which contains seeds or nuts, which could cause an allergy problem. Part of their mission is to teach other breweries how to creatively reuse bread. So on their website, they list many other breweries doing similar work. There probably is a brewery near you who is making beer from excess bread. Tristram Stewart started Toast Ale in 2015. He has been a long-time activist in the area of food waste, and Toast Ale has won many awards for their work. You can also make vodka from baked goods, as shown by the company called Misadventure & Co., which is located in San Diego, California. And they use all kinds of baked goods, not only bread, to make their vodka. So next I'm going to share stories about companies that are reusing grains left over from making beer. And these are called Brewers spent grains. So what is that? When a brewer makes beer, they need something called malted barley. And when you make the beer, it transforms the sugar in that malted barley into the alcohol. But it leaves a mash. And 42 million tons of this mash is thrown away worldwide each year. And when the waste from one industry can be used by another, it is called industrial symbiosis, which is like industrial level creative reuse. So the company Rise Products makes these grains into a flour. The flour has 12 times the fiber, 2 times the protein, and 1/3 of the carbs compared to typical all-purpose flour. They invented their own method for making the flour, and they say this method could work to help creatively reuse many other organic products, such as grapes that are used to make wine, fruit pulps that are used to make citrus products, or okara, which is a byproduct of making soy milk. So their method involves drying the grains and then grinding it into flour. And they have to collect the grains from the breweries and dry it within 6 hours or it goes bad. Now they make 2 kinds of flour. There's a lighter flour, which is made from the lighter sort of IPA beers, and then a darker flour from the darker, like a stout or a porter beer. Now, currently, this flour costs a lot more than regular all-purpose flour, but hopefully over time, they can get their process worked out and maybe the price will come down. The company was started by Bertha Jimenez in New York City. So she and her team member are mechanical engineers, and they experimented for a long time to find a reasonable product that chefs would use. Today, they work with many craft brewers in New York City, but they also work with very large beer companies such as Anheuser-Busch. So sometimes in rural areas, brewers' spent grains were used as animal feed, and that worked really well. But in urban areas with very few farms, a lot of that spent grain gets thrown away. So Regrained is a company in San Francisco that focuses on gathering the grains from craft breweries in the city. And they currently make granola bars and puff snacks from those grains, but they intend to make many more products as well. The founders were 2 friends who enjoyed making their own beer. And they noticed that after they made the beer, there was a lot of nice smelling grains left over. And they wondered if maybe they could do something with those grains to earn money to make more beer. And they found that they were using about a pound of grain for every 6-pack of beer. So it was really adding up. They also thought it was odd that you only use the sugars from the grains to make the beer, but all the other nutrient value was being thrown away. So once they figured out how to make flour from their brewers' spent grains, they researched and they found that if they could recover all the grains from breweries in America every year, it would be possible to bake 34 loaves of bread or more than 1,300 cookies for each person in the United States, just from these brewers' spent grains. And you can learn more about their research and what they have figured out by watching the TED Talk by one of the founders. His name is Dan Kurzrock. In both of these examples of Rise Products and Regrained, they are addressing 2 problems with one solution. They're addressing both the problem of filling our landfills, but also they're addressing the problem of food insecurity. Finally, I heard a story on NPR about how the town of Bozeman in Montana is experimenting with using brewers' spent grains to help with their sewage system. So Coraline Rivas is the engineer for the town, and she says that these grains can help reduce algal blooms when added to the sewage at the right time. And they have found that this has saved the town a lot of money. Normally, they would use something called alum to address these issues, but they're finding that the brewers' spent grains works just as well. And alum is expensive, but brewers' spent grains are free. And it has also allowed them to avoid doing some upgrades in their wastewater plant. So next I want to talk about artists who have made art installations with bread. So one technique that many artists have made with bread is to toast pieces of bread into different shades and then lay them out like a giant mural so that they make an image. So effectively, they are treating each piece of bread like a pixel in an image. Now, these art pieces are made usually from hundreds or even thousands of pieces of toast. So 3 artists who have taken on this technique, one is Maurice Bennett, who's also known as the Toast Man, for obvious reasons, Henry Hargreaves, and Laura Hadland. So Laura, for example, made a portrait of her mother-in-law as a birthday gift from almost 10,000 pieces of toast. So, if you're an art teacher, you might think about this, and maybe using toast would be a fun art project to do with your class. The next type of toast art I want to mention is a dress made from stale bread. So it was in the Junk Couture show in 2019, and the title of the dress was "I'd Like to Make Toast." It won the award that year for Most Unusual Materials. So the dress was made from 1,600 triangles of toast sewn together with fishing line. And it looked kind of like toast chainmail. So what they would do is they would cut the toast into various shapes, mostly triangles, but also circles and some other shapes. And then they would varnish each piece of toast to keep it from going moldy. And then they would sew it all together. They got their bread from a local bakery, and they were sure to only use the bread that would not be sold. The other kind of fun part about this dress is that there's a color gradient. So near the bottom or the hem of the dress, the toast was darker. And then as you went up the dress towards the top, the toast got lighter and lighter. So I will link to a video by the students who made this dress so you can see it in action. It's pretty amazing. The next artist I'm going to talk about bakes giant human sculptures from bread dough. Now, I know he's not creatively reusing bread, but I was so intrigued by his method, I wanted to talk about it. His name is Matteo Lucca, and I'll share a video of his process in the show notes. So he has built these huge pans. He's a sculptor, so he knows how to use metal and sculpt it into these exquisite human forms. Then he makes an extraordinarily large amount of dough and he puts it in the pans. And then he's also built a very large wood-fed oven outside. And you can see a video of his whole process. It looks extremely heavy, lifting all that and putting it in the stove. And from his pan to his stove, it looks like everything is made from creatively reused materials. The only thing that's not creatively reused, I think, is the dough. So the resulting bread people sculptures look like maybe like the crumbling stone sculptures that you might see in Italy where he lives. The thing that's different about them is that they are in various shades of color from light brown to burnt dough, which is kind of creepy and also really cool looking. So he, in his method, says he's using unleavened bread and he treats it so it doesn't go moldy. It doesn't say how he treats it. He also makes bread that looks like people's hands. For example, like two people holding hands. The last art installation I want to talk about from expired bread was a huge sculpture of the Arc de Triomphe made from a metal grid and then filled with stale bread. So this sculpture was about 5 meters tall and about 5 meters wide. The artist's name is Marcus Jeschonig, and this sculpture was his statement about food waste. He built this sculpture in Austria in 2012, and he noted that at that time in Austria, they would throw out about 70,000 tons of bread each year. If you want to check out his work, a lot of it is about the fragility of the planet. Well, next, let's talk about what you can do at home to address the question of stale bread. So it certainly has been a trend this year to bake our own bread and also to use everything up. So there has been this profusion of recipes related to bread on the internet. Certainly one way to reduce the chance of bread going bad is to make something called an eat soon box. You might have one in your fridge for things that need to be refrigerated and one on your shelf for things that can be kept outside the fridge, like your bread. And this reminds everyone in your house that it's important to eat those items first. And there are so many things that we can make from bread if it has gone stale, such as breadcrumbs, croutons, crostini, bread pudding, and French toast. And this year I learned about 2 more ideas. One is called ribollita, which is a vegetable stew thickened with bread, and panzanella, which is bread salad. And since we're talking about the creative reuse of grains and baked goods, I will also share in the show notes a recipe for how to make a cake from leftover oatmeal. Not that I ever have leftover oatmeal because I eat it all. And then I also found someone who showed how you could take a cake that maybe has fallen or got burned, and you could save the good parts and you could make it into a jelly roll. Now, some artists actually make crafts from industrial produced white bread, kind of like Wonder Bread, because it never seems to get moldy. So I will link to a tutorial on how you can make sculpture dough from white bread. And then I also found one artist who actually embroidered white bread. So thank you for listening. Until next time, may you see bread and Brewers spent grains as a source of creative reuse in your life.